Let's begin our presentation. Moving into recovery, why employee well-being should be your top priority. We'll be talking about emerging employee expectations and what it means for companies today as we move into recovery, including what the research tells us about employee expectations emerging from COVID-19, how to bridge the expectation gap between what a company provides and what employees want. Hosting today's discussion is Sharon Patterson, EVP and CHRO for LHH. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Thank you, Honesty, and thanks everyone for joining today. As I was introduced, I'm Sharon Patterson. I'm the Global Head of HR for LHH. And for those of you who don't know LHH, we help companies realize the full potential of their people by helping their employees navigate change, become better leaders, develop better careers, and transition to new jobs. Joining me today, I'm very excited to introduce Patrick Cournoyer, Chief Evangelist for Peakon, which is an awesome title. Peakon is a people analytics and employee engagement firm. When implementing Peakon at the San Francisco technology company, where he was previously the Vice President of People, Patrick was so impressed with both the product and the team that he moved halfway around the world to join Peakon in 2016. As Chief Evangelist, Patrick travels the world speaking about the transformative power of Peakon. His passion is to inspire thought and action within the global HR community. And LHH was one of the first clients of Peakon back in 2016. We've been using it for over 4 years now and have found it extraordinarily powerful in terms of our people management processes. So we're going to talk to Patrick today about the growing importance of employee well-being, its connection to business performance, and the ways companies can support employee well-being to deliver better results. And this topic, as I'm sure you'll all agree, is more important now than ever. Thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So let's get right into it, Patrick. Can you give us some background on the Peakon Heartbeat Report?
Absolutely. So Peakon has the largest data set with regards to continuous employee listening. And to give you some context of what that data set looks like, we have over 90 million survey responses in Peakon. And that number sounds like a big number, but to put into some context of what that means, every second in the day around the world, an employee is answering a Peakon survey. And approximately every 4 seconds in a day, an employee somewhere in the world is also leaving a free text comment. So the depth and the substance and significance of the data set is incredibly important. The other aspect is that we have employees in 160 countries around the world that are participating in Peakon surveys at their organizations. So the relevance of the data, in particular for all the people that are on the webinar today, is very real. And so a couple of times a year, we take a look into the data a bit more deeply, and we try to understand some trends, some insights that are coming out, and we call those heartbeat reports. Our most recent heartbeat report was around employee expectations, and we released that in the beginning of this year. Obviously, the pandemic has happened, so as we talk through this data and some of the findings, we'll explain what the expectations were of employees before the pandemic, but also that those employee expectations absolutely are still incredibly relevant and if not even more relevant today in many areas. And they also are evolving, and we're all building our new chapter of our organizations in the new world of work. But in the employee expectations report that we released at the beginning of the year, we found, when we looked into the data, that almost 60% of employees around the world are not engaged. And that means that they're either passively or even actively disengaged in their workplace. And that leaves 40% of employees, right, around the world that are actively engaged in what they do and how they do their work. So while many people will think 40% is not that bad, it really is a serious problem for businesses. And as we evolve into this new world of work, employee engagement and the connectedness of our teams is even more relevant. So organizations definitely feel a closer connection to their employees today. I'm sure many of the companies that are on the webinar today have been feeling that their employees are more connected and probably more engaged over the past couple of months. But that is something that we still have to keep our focus on as we grow into the future. Because disengagement not only takes a cultural toll for us at a business, but it also very much costs businesses money. HBR estimated that disengagement costs companies in the US alone up to $550 billion. So if you think about the business impact that disengagement has, on top of the cultural and people impact that it has, it's quite significant. So it's something that we should all be focusing on. And we'll talk about, today we'll talk about specific expectations and how we can improve, because I think it's important to talk about the way forward and how we can get better. So that's what we're seeing in the data right now, Sharon.
Well, let's get into that data. So what's the research telling us?
Perfect. So, what we're finding is there is a couple of areas that are emerging when it comes to employee expectations. First, employees are very concerned about environmental impact. There was a over 50% increase of employee conversation and expectations around the environment and the impact that their organizations have on the environment in the past year. We looked at terms across all of the comments, so hundreds of thousands, millions of comments that are in Peakon, and we saw growth in terms of topics like plastic and single use and also carbon footprint. So employees are very much connected to the environmental impact of their organizations, and they expect that their organizations are going to have a significant stance on lowering their environmental impact. Also in 2019, it was the first year that we see mentions of topics like Greta Thunberg, and employees respond very much to what's immediately happening around them. And so we see that a lot in the employee comments, and that's why we're not surprised that there was a significant increase in conversation around environmental impact. The second area, and this is very near and dear to everybody's hearts right now, is around flexible work and remote working. Now, I think it's quite important for us to understand that before the pandemic, there was almost a 20% increase in conversation and expectation with employees around more flexible and better or more significant remote working and flexibility at work. So we've already seen a lot of organizations prior to the pandemic that were working on creating a more flexible work environment for their employees. But then all of a sudden during the pandemic, we jumped ahead 5 to 10 years into the future, right? As organizations all of a sudden had to work remotely. And so it's working for a lot of organizations, but we're building that out. We're seeing, how is this working now? Many organizations are in the return to work phase. How are we going to incorporate what's been working really well over the past couple of months, knowing that over the past year, there's already been an expectation of employees. Then all of a sudden, the past 3 months happened and the world unfolded the way how it did. And so now we even have to figure out how we're going to make the decisions and the environment, the flexible work environment that we've had to create. How are we going to continue that in the future and make that work for the long term? The third area, and this is something obviously in particular over the past week or so and the current climate of the world, diversity and inclusion increased also about 20% in expectations globally over the past year. And the need for employee or for organizations to have inclusive cultures and allow for organizations or allow for employees to bring their full self to work has never been more important, in particular in the climate today. In today's workplace, it's estimated that it will take 100 years to close the gender pay gap. And that is an astounding fact. And so, and something else is, nearly 40% of UK FTSE 100 companies don't have any non-white board members. So, I mean, there's a lot of significant work that needs to be done in the D&I space, and there's a lot of positive progress when it comes to D&I and in particular inclusion in the workplace. So I'm sure that those three are interesting and also Sharon, I'm sure from your perspective as well, very relevant to the world today.
Oh, absolutely. I think it would be interesting to see how that third bullet has changed just even in the last couple of weeks. But so let's
Absolutely.
talk a little bit more about employee
Mhm.
well-being. Why do we survey employees on this topic?
Yeah, so well-being could not be more critical. So we saw well-being was another one of the topics that we saw an increased expectation from employees, again, before the pandemic. And now employee well-being is at the top of every organization's responsibility and also focus area. And that is amazing. As you said, before I worked for Peakon and before I was doing this work, I was a practitioner in the people world, and creating amazing places for people to work is part of what we all do and what we're all passionate about when we talk about people and working in the people field. And so well-being has absolutely become a business issue. And not only is it a priority for organizations today, but it is, before the pandemic and in the findings that we had, it's a significant and has a significant impact on business. And even more today, and as we build this new chapter of the new world of work, it's going to have even more of a significant impact. So it's estimated that burnout was in 2019, towards the end of 2019, burnout was added to the WHO's International Classification of Diseases. So the concept of burnout is a very real thing. We had the feeling of it for many years, but now it's a reality. And even in particular in the world today and how we are managing our work life and how we're planning for the future, well-being and burnout is something that we have to be very focused on. We live in an always-on world, and now with everything being technologically centered with organizations, it's even more of an always-on world. So we have to be really cautious about that. But burnout is estimated to cost global economy up to $323 billion a year. We are able to look at generational data as well in our data set. And you can see here on the slide, I'll just call out one here, but the discussion around well-being with younger generations, in particular Gen Z, increased almost 30% over the past year. And in different sectors, we're also able to look at different sectors and understand from the perspective of different industries. And in the finance sector, it raised the expectations and conversation around it raised almost or over 50%. And in different regions of the world, almost 40% in Auckland and New Zealand, or specifically in New Zealand, that there was a significant increase in conversation around employee well-being. So not only from a data perspective is the importance of well-being there, and from a business perspective, but honestly, Sharon, I think most importantly, the impact that it has on culture and the impact that it's going to have on how employees sustain for the future is so important for organizations to focus on right now.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And one of the features that Peakon has added to your tool, which I found really, really helpful, is this ability to filter certain words in comments, words like burnout and stress, workload. There are certain words that pop out, and that really is really helpful to us as leaders and HR professionals to get some really good accurate data about where there are problems or pockets of issues within the organization. So I think that's just a really great feature of Peakon. So when you think back, Patrick, to the insights that you've gained through this research, and you look at it, pre-pandemic and now as we're moving into recovery, how well do you think companies are meeting expectations?
So there's definitely an expectations gap, and we that's how we signify it, is that there is the reality of what employees are feeling or perceiving or experiencing is quite different in a lot of scenarios and circumstances than what organizations feel or they perceive that they're presenting or providing for the employees. And while there's very much a clear connection between employee engagement and overall business success, and that's been proven from a data perspective. For years, that was anecdotal, and now we can very much show how business performance is very much directly correlated and from a data perspective connected with a higher level of engagement. So when employees are successful, organizations are successful. And when organizations realize that and realize that their most important asset are their people, and the heartbeat of their organization are their people, and their future success is truly based on their people's success, then that's where the corner starts to, or we start turning the corner with normalizing that gap between what organizations are providing to employees, or their perception of what they're creating for employees, and then what employees are actually experiencing. So most organizations have historically prioritized customer expectations or shareholder expectations over employee expectations, and that really needs to shift in a lot of ways. And I think that the pandemic and the world of work over the past 3 months has really shed a light on that, and has shed a light on the fact that culture and people are, or I should say, culture is about people. Ultimately, your people are your biggest asset. And I think so many organizations maybe knew that, didn't maybe realize it as much, or didn't celebrate it as much. And now they are. And I love that. I love seeing this change. And I like to be very future focused, and I love to help organizations and hear when organizations are focused on the future, and organizations that are closing that expectation gap with having their focus on their people and making business decisions and shaping their business for the future around their people is really how the expectations gap is going to close.
So taking that a little further, what do you think companies should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I think there's 4 areas around bridging the expectation gap. The first is truly understanding what your employees need. And that's very unique and individual to every organization. So while we talk about generational expectations, right, and industry expectations, those are data points, and those are important data points to understand, and for us to realize that there are certain pockets or certain right now we have 5 generations in the workforce, right? So understanding the different generation expectations around all of these different employee expectations that we found in the report is very helpful. However, really understanding what your employees need for your individual organization is the number 1 priority to help to start bridging that expectations gap. The second, which we've talked about, but I just want to reiterate the fact that making well-being a business priority, employee well-being being a business priority, is the way of the future. And it truly is. And so we all need to figure out how to do that in the most productive way. Providing a supporting environment that provides good levels of communication, empathy, leadership, and flexibility. We'll talk about that in a minute, because I think there's a lot in that, and there's a lot in understanding two-way communication and empathy around the situation that employees are in today. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But also prioritizing trust over monitoring. And we recently were looking about how organizations are trying to encourage a incredibly open amount of communication, right? And saying, well, if we're on video, cameras need to be on, and let's have high visibility into our to-do lists and our project lists. And actually employees can feel that that's almost having the opposite reaction, which is it's invasive or it's monitoring. In reality, what we need to do is promote trust within our organizations, create that two-way trust between leaders and their teams, create autonomy within our teams so that people can choose the way how they're working and how they're getting their work done. Because ultimately it's just different now, and it will be different for the future. And that's really around creating meaningful, trusting relationships. But that's all about working with your employees and listening to the voice of your employees to understand their needs. Yeah,
those are really, really great points. I think if your company's like ours, these are things we've struggled with because we've just been thrown into this current situation without a lot of time to think about it or plan for it. So it's these are really interesting insights. So dig a little deeper, if you wouldn't mind. What are some actions you can take as leaders?
in particular around employee well-being, since that is very much the focus and should be the focus for the future. The first is around providing very regular communication and transparency to help employees really understand what you're doing to protect their safety and protect them. What we have seen over the past couple of months is that employees have responded incredibly well to the feeling and the perception, not even just the perception, but truly the experience that they've had with their organizations, taking their personal safety, their personal health and well-being as a priority. So that's incredibly important. And you know, Sharon, you brought up a good point just a minute ago, is that many organizations have struggled over the past couple of months to just make a shift in the way how they're working, having to do it very quickly. Organizations were changing on a weekly basis. The world is changing on a weekly basis. And we've never experienced that in the world of work before. One thing I truly don't think you can go wrong with is empowering the voice of your employees and asking them their feedback, their thoughts, their opinions, because they are very much going to be part of what the future is. And the only way how organizations are truly going to know how to support their employees is by listening to them. And it's by hearing them. So the second area is around including the full spectrum of well-being. So we talked about burnout, the WHO putting that on one of on a disease list in 2019, but it goes beyond just physical well-being, mental well-being, employee well-being is a broad spectrum, and we have to understand all of the aspects of it and focus on a multiple, the full spread of well-being. The third area is around being very aware of external factors that are impacting employee well-being and contribute to stress. The current world situation is a great example, and many organizations have had to really and chosen to step up and talk about that and talk about the stress that we're all feeling right now. And it's the world is just an incredibly difficult place right now in a lot of ways. And so understanding external factors and how that contributes to stress and how that contributes to work output and just people and who we are as human beings is very important. And the third area is, we talked about productivity, we talked a minute ago about this concept of trust and autonomy. And productivity is something that employees are concerned about. It's not so much they're concerned about their productivity, it's the perception of their productivity. In a remote and flexible world of working, employees, and we have this also, we've seen this in our data over the past 3 months from employees answering questions specifically around the pandemic, we have seen that employees have the lowest level of satisfaction or the lowest level of confidence around how their employers are perceiving their productivity. Because there's always, for a lot of organizations, there's been this inherent idea of, well, are you working as much from home, right? Are you being as productive as you could be if you're not in the office? And we've seen that employees are, and we have to trust that employees are. And that's about managing to work output and to work product as opposed to managing to time. So in this new world of flexible working, if somebody doesn't respond to an email or a Slack message in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, then we have to be okay with that. And we have to trust the fact that that's not somebody being unproductive, but it's just maybe they're doing something else, or maybe they're really their heads down in doing work. And so it's just the creating that availability for people to be productive, that is providing them the right equipment, the right technology to be able to do that, because as soon as the trust begins to erode between leaders and their teams, we've built up this amazing amount of trust over the past couple of months, and we have to continue that, because the world is starting again, right? And there are people are coming out of lockdown, people are returning to work, and flexible work and remote work is absolutely going to be something of the future for the high majority of organizations. So taking the focus away from time productivity and moving it towards work productivity and output productivity, and allowing employees to find their way and to make that agreement of productivity with their leaders in an individual, unique way, I really believe that's the way of the future.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the term as many times as I have. There's no playbook for what we're dealing with right now. And I think there's a really big temptation to draft a new playbook and say, well, the old playbook, it doesn't help. It doesn't apply to these situations. So we need to draft a new playbook. So instead of that, how do you just integrate employee well-being into the culture? So it's not a book, it's not a policy, it's not a document that has to be shared. What do you suggest for that?
So that's now in particular, we're really focusing on, we have to avoid that erosion of trust, and we have to create psychological safety, right? And so that is, and you talked earlier, or something that LHH is great at doing is helping to develop leaders, right? And that is something we're going through, all of our organizations are going through change, and significant change. And in the past, change has been maybe something that's been planned, right? Or we've had some way of planning for it, right? It could be a merger and acquisition or some sort of a substantial change within a business, right? But now the world of work is changing in ways that we have not been able to prepare for. But what we can prepare for, and I don't want to use I would want to use the word prepare for, what we can support is the concept of psychological safety, the concept of empowering leaders to create meaningful relationships, individualized relationships with their team and the members of their team, to create that trust and to keep building on that trust for the future. Because as I said a minute ago, once that erodes, it's incredibly difficult to get back. And the other area is that many leaders are going to struggle to do that right now. Like, leaders are being put into a space that they're now leading in a way that they've never had to lead before.
Yeah.
So we have to we have to support those leaders. We have to find leaders within organizations that are really great at that, and create these peer mentoring or these availability of, it's not just a responsibility of HR to create leaders these days, right? Like, now there's so many different aspects of being an effective leader, and that's just going to continue to evolve for the future. So those pockets of leaders that are really great at this, maybe some remote leaders that have, or leaders that have managed remote workforces for the past year or 2 years or 3 years, and connecting them in a peer mentoring way with a leader that all of a sudden is now leading a team that they were all in an office 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and probably won't be in an office together for the foreseeable future. How do we help those leaders with creating trust and psychological safety? And that's the second area, is leaders are evolving. And the most important thing we can do right now is empower our leaders to understand that they're going through a whole new world, that they're being pushed into a new skill set, and a lot of them are unfamiliar with it. And we have to focus on developing skills around coaching, mentoring, behaviors around supporting employee well-being, being comfortable with that, having the right conversations, having confident conversations around well-being, and the full spectrum of well-being, right? It's not just about physical well-being, it's mental well-being, psychological well-being, and that's a lot for leaders. That's a lot for frontline leaders. But frontline leaders are, they're the most important parts of our business. They run our businesses, and so now a lot of them are feeling the expectations, and also feeling incredibly inspired by the fact that their people leadership responsibility is just as critical as their business leadership responsibility. And the great thing is so many organizations are now having those two things be on the same level, if not the people leadership side being more. And I think that's an amazing step for all of us to be taking into the future.
Absolutely. And so, if I think back to the way we might have described well-being in the past, it's definitely has changed and it's evolved. Tell me, when did you start to see this happening? When did this change start?
Yeah, I think the evolution of it is, we've been seeing it over the past, I would say, a couple of years, probably 2 years. But in particular, this true focus around employee well-being over the past 6 months has been an incredible focus. So, I love this quote from the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute, in particular the last part where it says, it's wonderful to see not only companies and governments and scientists embracing new measurements of progress, and we failed to convert the wealth we have in creating well-being. So I think well-being has definitely become the new yardstick. It's become a new measurement for all of us to understand our organizational success. And as I said before, people are the heartbeat of our organizations, and our business success is going to be tied to how well we do with our people's success, in particular, as we build for the new world of work. So
great. So no job security issues for HR by the sound of things.
no, and a lot of work, ahead of us, but all work for the good of employees and ultimately the good of business, because like I said, from a data perspective, we know and we can prove that when employees are engaged, businesses succeed.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. That was really, really helpful and very insightful. We'd now like to open things up to anyone on this call who has some questions. And I see, as I look at my screen, we've got several already. So here's one, Patrick, I think that we can answer. How do we help people re-enter, keeping well-being in mind? So when people are starting to, I hate to use the term return to work because everybody's been working, but when they start,
that's a good point.
When they start to return to the office and they return to, an office environment, how do we help make sure that they stay well and they stay healthy, and do you have any practical tips on that?
And Sharon, I just have to tell you, that is brilliant what you just said around return to work, because everybody's talking about return to work. Yeah. And it's so true. Everybody has been working, right? It's a return. I think it's even a return to the new world of work, right? Or the new what the new future. I think there's a couple of things around that. One is understanding what is working and what is not within organizations in a very real-time way is very important. So we've seen and experienced that every week over the past 12 weeks, things have been changing, right? Businesses have been looking at, we used to plan our business, for half years, right? Or quarters. And then we look at the past 12 weeks, and we've been looking at our business under a microscope and I'm sure every organization on this call has been looking at their business under a microscope in a very real-time way, in a weekly way, daily. So why would we not understand how our employees are feeling on a very real basis? So I think it's incredibly important today and for the future is to empower employees to let organizations know how they're feeling. And the second step, and when I say they're feeling, how they're experiencing well-being and how they're just experiencing this next phase, which there's a lot of fear around. There's people, I live in London, right? And we're still working from home, but over the next few months, I'm sure we'll start having people go back to work, but people are fearful of being back out in public and, being on public transit. And it's not just in London, it's around the world, people have these concerns. So it's understanding that and also understanding how those concerns around well-being are evolving in a real-time basis. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have to take action as an organization, and we have to be able to be agile and pivot as far as what our employees' needs are, because we find employees very much respond to immediately what's going on around them. And I think organizations in general have done a good job of responding in an immediate way over the past couple of months. And that's worked really well. That for all those people on the call that feel like my teams are more connected, the culture is getting stronger. We never thought that the culture would be getting stronger with people working remotely or not in an office together. But the key is that we have to continue to take action and drive action based off of what the employees' needs are at the time. Because well-being is not just about, let's put a program in today around well-being and that's going to be good for the next year. Mm-hmm. I think in the past, we've kind of thought that, right? It's like, okay, we're going to create an employee assistance program and they're amazing. Employee assistance programs are amazing, but that's like one piece of the puzzle. And that's something that is there, and many employees use that and they're brilliant, but we have to continuously be providing new ways of supporting well-being. And that's not just on like an annual cycle anymore. It's now listening to it almost on a weekly or monthly basis.
Exactly. Yeah, well, thank you. There are a couple of questions too. Do you have any data? You've mentioned a couple of times in the presentation about the link between employee engagement and business success. Do you have data that you've got through Peakon that you would be able to share that kind of helps put the math together for people?
Yes, we do. Yeah, absolutely. So we can do that on an organizational level. Number one, we have an ability in the platform to be able to understand business metrics and how business metrics directly, how employee engagement directly correlates with business metrics. But we also have data in some of the Heartbeat reports that understand or that give a bit more insight into how employee engagement does affect business outcomes. So that is evolving. And we will be doing many more reports in the future around how directly how employee engagement is impacting business. But the answer is yes. In particular, it's quite interesting to see it on an organizational level with employees or companies specific data and how employee engagement truly does impact their business success.
And so, Patrick, there's another question that ties into that, and this is a, I'm sure it's on many people's minds. Any investments in well-being are really a priority. However, it's a more of a long-term investment, and many of us work for companies that have, short-term targets, reporting to shareholders, et cetera. And now, with everything that's been going on in the economic environment, companies are trying to control their short-term expenses. So any suggestions to how a leader can present this as an investment that will sell? And maybe it's tied to the topic we just talked about around the link between employee engagement and business success. But again, that's got more of a long-term view. So have you got any thoughts or suggestions on how we can help sell this to our internal organization?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before around, and I'll kind of tie this into the answer to that question. So the first is around empowering the voice of employees on a regular basis, right? So taking that data and hearing that voice. So what we are passionate about at Peakon is taking employee feedback, converting it into insights, and then those insights being designed for leaders to take action off of. Because ultimately, if action is not being taken off of what employees are sharing and their thoughts, feelings, and perspective, then it's a dead end in a lot of ways. And so we have to be very cautious or very focused on taking action off of the insights. Now, I think where the selling of it or the selling of the importance of it is where you start seeing trends in data. It's not so much around a score, or a static number. It's around seeing how the initiatives that you're taking are impacting your business, and being able to do that from a data perspective is truly how the programs and the investment that we are making in our people have a more significant seat at the business table when we can show from a data perspective that there is a positive trend over time where, and that can happen very immediately. So we have organizations that are asking employees questions on a weekly basis right now, because that's great. Employees want to have their voice heard in so many different ways. And so many of our portfolio companies are surveying their employees on a weekly basis. So when they move to understanding data and seeing trend data week over week, that starts putting a data perspective onto the initiatives that you're doing as an organization, and again, the actions that you're taking as an organization. And then you can start correlating an increase over time in satisfaction through different drivers. So for example, autonomy or management support, there's many different key drivers of engagement, but that starts bringing a reality from a data perspective to support the investments that you're doing with the people. So that's a long, but the snippet on that is support it with data. And you can't refute data. Data is going to tell you what's working and what's not, but not only from the perspective of it being important, but also to help you as an organization understand, are you doing the right things? Are you taking the right actions? Because instead of investing, we're all very our spend right now is we're all aware of it, right? So if we are spending in employee programs or in focus areas for employees, let's make sure that it's the right spend, because the last thing we want to be doing is investing in something and then it's not working or it's not having the intended impact and we don't find that out for months.
Yeah.
Let's find that out now so that we can change, so we can course correct.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's really good. And that's really one of the, the significant benefits of the Pulse survey, and getting that feedback right away is what you're doing, making an impact. So we are closing out on our time, but I have one last question, which hopefully is a short one for you, Patrick. And it's around, do you have any plans to do another survey, another heartbeat survey after the pandemic? So, your data that we've talked about today is now arguably a few months old, which in 2020, it's archaic almost. I'm sure it's still very relevant in a lot of ways, but it would be, I'm sure, very interesting to the people on the call. I know I'd be interested to see what your plans are for taking a look at this again, and what time frame.
Yes, so we do heartbeat reports 2 to 3 times a year. Our next heartbeat report will be coming out towards the end of the summer. We are consistently looking at data. So we have launched multiple types of surveys within organizations around understanding the pandemic. First, we understood the reaction to the pandemic. The next phase that many of our organizations are asking their employees is around this return to we'll say return to work, but return to the office, return to the new normal. In our blog, we're consistently looking at data and the data insights. So we just recently put out a blog, I believe last week, or a report last week around the current data over the past couple of months. And so we're regularly doing the more in-depth data report will be coming out towards the end of the summer, early fall. But on a regular basis, we are providing insights that we're finding in our data. So you take a look at the website and find out the most recent data reports. But next heartbeat report will be coming out within, I'd say, 3 to 4-ish months.
Great. Well, I'm sure it'll be good reading. I'm very interested to see what that looks like. So we need to wrap up, and thank you so much, Patrick, for your time and for these insights. I think they're really helpful to all of us as we try to navigate through, the next phase of 2020 and see, where things start to head. And so we really do appreciate your time. We had lots more questions than we could answer, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question today, but we will, put some answers together for those of you we didn't get to today, and certainly make this presentation available. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Sharon. We appreciate it. Thank you for everybody joining as well. Take care.
Bye.